At the historic Koino-yu bathhouse, which had stood proudly for 60 years as a neighborhood sanctuary, the heavy wooden doors finally closed for the night. A part-time helper named Mori spent his late nights scrubbing down the deep wooden tubs, sweeping the tiled floors, and cleaning up long after the midnight closing time. He took immense pride in getting things perfectly ready for the next day, ensuring that every wooden bucket was stacked and every surface gleamed. He had lived and worked on the property for almost 10 years now, entirely content with his low-paying role. To any outsider, he was just a dedicated worker, but to himself, this routine was his entire world. He felt that he truly existed just to work at this specific bathhouse. Late one night, as the quiet hum of the building settled, 15-year-old Tatsuno Rihito stepped out into the hallway. Rihito was starting high school the very next morning, and the weight of the milestone was keeping him awake. Seeing a light still on, Rihito approached the helper. He asked Mori if he was still up, wondering out loud if he had been making too much noise or if Mori was doing okay. Rihito explained that he just wanted to chat for a little bit to clear his mind. Mori looked up from his work and immediately checked on the young boy. Recognizing the subtle signs of exhaustion, Mori gently advised him that staying up late was terrible for his health and especially bad for his skin. Rihito let out a soft sigh, admitting that he knew he should be resting, but he was simply too nervous to sleep. Mori smiled warmly, asking if he was truly that anxious about the transition. Rihito nodded, confessing that it was a huge change. He thanked Mori just for listening to him vent in the middle of the night. As they spoke in the dim light of the bathhouse lounge, Rihito began to open up about his deeper anxieties regarding high school. He murmured that he had heard rumors about his assigned class this year, and apparently the environment was going to be incredibly rough. He looked down, admitting his genuine fear of getting targeted or bullied by the older, tougher students. Mori's demeanor shifted, his eyes locking onto the boy with fierce intensity. He told Rihito not to worry about a single thing. He promised that if anyone even attempted to bully him, he would personally step in, track down the troublemakers, and cook a massive batch of delicious korokke for them as a peace offering to force everyone to get along. Rihito blinked in confusion, repeating the word korokke under his breath. He admitted he wasn't entirely sure how fried potato croquettes would solve a school bullying crisis, but he smiled and thanked Mori for the sentiment anyway. Watching the innocent boy, Mori's mind wandered back to his true reasons for staying at the bathhouse. Exactly 10 years ago, Mori had been frantically chased by a dangerous, shadowy organization. He had been completely exhausted, his body burned, battered, and falling apart on the brink of absolute death. He recalled begging out loud in the dark, desperate for anyone to help him, but no one in the cruel world had been willing to lend a hand. He had completely accepted his fate, closing his eyes and thinking that the end had finally come. It was the young, innocent Rihito who had stumbled upon him and saved his life, bonding Mori to this family forever. Before their conversation could continue, Rihito's father and grandfather clattered into the lounge, breaking the serious mood. The father was in high spirits, carrying a bottle and suggesting that they all hang out right there and have a late-night drink. He declared it a grand celebration for Rihito's official high school admission. Rihito groaned playfully, reminding his dad that they had already had a massive celebratory drink just yesterday to mark the very last day of middle school. The father laughed it off, waving his hand and insisting that a school admission was a thoroughly happy occasion worthy of multiple toasts. He then turned to Mori, thanking him for cleaning up the facilities so beautifully. He noted that while Koino-yu didn't feature a modern sauna or a fancy massage bath, the family took immense pride in keeping the entire place absolutely spotless. The father acknowledged that the property remained beautiful because it had been meticulously taken care of for generations, but he admitted he felt incredibly guilty that Mori always worked so hard for such a remarkably low salary. Mori immediately shook his head, insisting that money was absolutely not an issue for him because he genuinely loved the bathhouse. The father grinned widely, jokingly saying that if that was the case, he would gladly let Mori work there completely for free from now on. Rihito quickly chimed in, scolding his dad and warning him that saying things like that might actually make Mori quit on them. Mori, however, remained dead serious, stating that he wouldn't mind working for free at all, especially if it meant he could guarantee being by Rihito's side for just 3 more years. The father laughed, muttering that Mori got carried away far too easily, and called out to Rihito's mother to bring a glass of red wine for Ranchan. As the drinks were poured, the father stared at Mori with a hazy, tipsy expression, suddenly asking who he was again. Rihito rolled his eyes, reminding his dad that this was Ranchan, the exact same person who had been working right alongside them for a whole decade. Mori bowed politely, introducing himself by his full name, Mori Ranmaru. When the father asked how old he was, Mori casually replied that he was about 450 years old. The father burst into laughter, commenting on what a remarkably long life that was. The grandfather chuckled from his chair, admitting that with the way Mori moved in the shadows, he honestly thought the helper was the Grim Reaper coming to take him away. Rihito defended Mori, telling his grandfather that the 450-year-old claim was just Ranchan's usual historical joke. Rihito praised Mori, noting that he knew an incredible amount about ancient history, which was the exact reason history had become Rihito's strongest subject in school. Mori nodded sagely, murmuring that he simply had a fair share of personal experience with the past. The father raised his glass, rambling about how he had heard Mori's historical stories 1,000 times already, while Rihito's dad gently apologized to Mori, explaining that their family simply had a bad habit of giving people weird nicknames and teasing them. Mori smiled genuinely, assuring them that he didn't mind at all, as this chaotic family felt incredibly comfortable and safe to him. Looking at the clock, Rihito realized how late it had gotten and announced he was finally heading to bed. He thanked Mori once more, telling him how deeply reassured he felt having him around. Rihito admitted that with high school starting, he knew he couldn't keep relying on Mori forever, but Mori fiercely interrupted, begging the boy to please keep relying on him for as long as possible. Rihito smiled, said his goodnights, and walked down the hall. Once the family had fallen asleep and Mori was left completely alone in the dark, his gentle demeanor slowly faded away, revealing the cold and calculating mind hidden beneath. He stared quietly down the hallway toward Rihito's room, whispering to himself about the boy's incredibly pure spirit and rare presence. While many teenagers his age rushed to change themselves with loud styles, dyed hair, or reckless behavior, Rihito remained strangely untouched by the world around him. Mori could not stop thinking about the boy's calm eyes, smooth black hair, and clear skin that carried no scars or signs of hardship. To him, it felt like witnessing something impossibly rare, a kind of perfection that only appeared once in a lifetime. Even at only 15 years old, Rihito already carried a quiet maturity that stirred Mori's ancient vampire instincts. Mori pressed a hand against his face, struggling to control the hunger growing deep inside him. Every part of him wanted to claim the boy immediately, yet he forced himself to stay calm. He reminded himself that he had already spent 10 long years waiting patiently. If he lost control now, he would ruin everything he had carefully protected for so long. Among vampires, tastes and desires differed greatly. Some valued strength, others searched for wisdom, and many chased rare bloodlines with unique spiritual energy. But Mori believed nothing could compare to a soul that had been carefully preserved from the corruption of the world. To him, true perfection required patience, time, and complete purity of spirit. He silently swore that he would spend the next 3 years protecting Rihito from danger and outside influence, making sure nobody damaged the future he had been waiting for. Trying to calm the dark excitement building inside him, Mori finally stepped away from the hallway. Realizing he needed fresh air to clear his thoughts, he quietly slipped out of the bathhouse and disappeared into the cold midnight night. The following morning, the sun rose bright and harsh. Rihito woke up feeling incredibly groggy, stretching and rubbing his eyes as he stepped out of the house. He muttered a quick apology to the empty air, knowing he had stayed up far too late the night before due to his nerves. As he hurried down the suburban streets toward his new school, the morning excitement and his lingering fatigue blurred together. He jogged around a sharp blind street corner, entirely unaware of his surroundings, holding a piece of breakfast bread in his hand. Suddenly, another student rounded the exact same corner at high speed. The two collided with a loud crash, tumbling violently onto the pavement. Rihito's breakfast bread flew out of his hand, landing squarely on the dusty ground. Gasping for air, Rihito looked up to see a girl dusting herself off. Panicked and embarrassed, Rihito blurted out an apology, asking if she was okay. The girl, equally flustered, replied that she was the one who should apologize, asking Rihito with genuine concern if he was hurt anywhere. Rihito scrambled to his feet, quickly waving his hands and insisting that he was completely fine. He looked down at his dropped breakfast, scooped it up, and laughed nervously, claiming the bread was perfectly safe thanks to the classic 3-second rule. The girl smiled kindly at his silliness, pulled a neat folded handkerchief from her bag, and handed it to him to clean his hands, softly telling him to take it. Rihito thanked her, staring at the handkerchief in a daze as she hurried away. Minutes later, Rihito arrived at the crowded school gates, just as the opening assembly began. The PA system blared, welcoming the new students and offering sincere congratulations on their school admission, wishing them a wonderful and productive 3 years together. The teachers instructed everyone to take their seats. In the crowd of Class 3, a student named Kaworu was caught staring intently at Rihito. When noticed, Kaworu jumped, quickly looking away and insisting that he wasn't staring at anything at all, just as the booming voice of the principal introduced Mr. Sakamoto as the official homeroom teacher for Class 3. The moment the school day ended, Rihito sprinted all the way back to the bathhouse, his face completely flushed and his chest heaving. He slammed the front doors open, screaming out Mori's name over and over again as he ran for the corridors. Inside the private living quarters, Mori was currently panicking, desperately trying to pull the heavy curtains closed against a beam of blinding afternoon sunlight. Mori shielded his eyes, groaning that the light was too bright, and that he felt like he was going to die from the exposure. Hearing the utter chaos of Rihito's entrance, Mori turned around, completely flustered.
Seeing the boy sweating, shaking, and clutching his chest, Mori immediately feared that something terrible had happened. He rushed over and asked if Rihito had been bullied or targeted on his very first day at school. Rihito quickly grabbed Mori's sleeves and begged him not to tell the family anything. Barely able to catch his breath, he confessed that his heart would not stop racing because he had developed a huge crush on someone at school. Mori completely froze. The words echoed through his mind like a disaster warning. A crush meant romance. Romance meant emotional attachment. And emotional attachment meant that Rihito's peaceful and carefully protected life could suddenly change forever. Mori felt dizzy for a moment, wondering if the sunlight outside had somehow affected his senses. Meanwhile, Rihito remained entirely unaware of Mori's silent panic. Holding his chest tightly, he desperately asked if this painful, overwhelming feeling was really what people called love. Mori forced himself to stay calm and weakly agreed that it probably was. That evening, the whole family gathered around the dinner table, and curiosity filled the room. Rihito's father and grandfather had both noticed his red face and distracted behavior throughout dinner. Smiling warmly, the father reminded Rihito about their family rule, that nobody was allowed to keep secrets in the house, and the grandfather quickly agreed. Leaning forward with interest, the father asked what kind of girl she was and demanded every detail. Rihito blushed deeply and stared down at his food while quietly explaining that she was kind, cute, and incredibly thoughtful. The father laughed loudly and waved his hand, joking that there were probably hundreds of girls like that across the city. He turned toward Mori, asking for agreement. Sitting stiffly at the edge of the table, Mori immediately agreed in an unusually loud voice that girls like that were extremely common and not special at all. The father then asked how the two had met. Before Rihito could answer, Mori suddenly explained the entire story in one cold breath, describing how they had bumped into each other on the way to school and instantly connected. Rihito snapped in embarrassment, yelling at Mori for exposing his private story in front of everyone. He complained that Mori was making his life sound like a cliché romance manga. Trying to fix the misunderstanding, Rihito carefully explained what had really happened. He described how the girl had kindly worried about him after he dropped his bread and had even offered him her handkerchief to make sure he was okay. Hearing the story, the father smiled proudly and raised his glass, casually giving his son advice about being responsible and careful as he got older. The grandfather immediately nodded in agreement. That single comment nearly shattered Mori's remaining composure. He slammed both fists onto the table, completely dropping his calm and polite attitude. The father and grandfather jumped back in shock as Mori began loudly arguing that they were handling the situation entirely the wrong way. He passionately insisted that Rihito was still only 15 years old and should focus on his studies, sports, and peaceful friendships instead of getting distracted by dramatic teenage romance. Mori continued lecturing the stunned family, declaring that chasing shallow excitement and emotional chaos would only bring unnecessary trouble into Rihito's life. Standing from his seat, he passionately argued that a calm, disciplined, and innocent lifestyle was far more valuable than reckless romance. The room fell completely silent as Mori demanded to know why nobody else seemed concerned about protecting Rihito's peaceful future.
Overwhelmed by the intense lecture, the father broke down, apologizing profusely and admitting that Mori was completely right and that he shouldn't have joked about it.
Mori slammed his fist down one last time, screaming to the ceiling that he held the utmost respect for virgins. Rihito, now thoroughly mortified, stood up with tears of embarrassment in his eyes. He screamed that they were all just making fun of him and that he was a total idiot for ever asking Mori for advice, storming off to his bedroom and slamming the door shut. A heavy silence fell over the dinner table as the grandfather quietly remarked that Rihito seemed pretty mad, which the father sheepishly confirmed. Realizing he had crossed a dangerous line that might alienate the boy, Mori hurried down the hall to Rihito's room. He knocked softly and slid the door open, bowing deeply as he apologized for hurting his feelings. Mori claimed he was simply worried about him, though he awkwardly muttered under his breath that he was specifically worried about the safety of his virginity. Rihito sat on his futon, sighing heavily and telling Mori to just drop it because he was over it. Mori kept pushing, offering to do absolutely anything to make it up to him as a formal apology. Rihito looked up, realizing this might be his chance to get an adult's perspective. He admitted that the timing was actually perfect because he was completely stuck on how to naturally talk to the girl the next time they crossed paths, asking Mori what he would do in that situation. Mori's eyes darkened as his true thoughts leaked out, answering instantly that if it were him, he would obliterate the girl without a second thought for daring to bewitch Rihito's soul. Catching himself just in time, Mori coughed nervously, quickly changing his answer and suggesting that he would perhaps offer the girl a sudden, intense shoulder massage while gazing intently at the nape of her neck. Rihito recoiled in absolute horror, yelling at Mori and asking what kind of deeply unhinged love life he has led in the past to suggest sudden, uninvited body contact on a school campus. Mori quickly walked back the bizarre suggestion, begging Rihito to completely forget he had ever said it. Curled up on his knees, Rihito looked at the helper curiously, noting that he had never actually asked about Mori's romantic past, and asked how Mori used to convey his feelings to the people he liked long ago. The question sent Mori spiraling into a vivid, agonizing flashback of his ancient life 4 centuries prior. In his mind, the smell of burning wood and blood filled the air as the warlord Oda Nobunaga stood before him amidst the flames of Hanoji. Nobunaga's voice echoed in the memory, stating that a human life lasts but a brief 50 years, nothing more than a fleeting dream or an illusion compared to the vastness of the heavens. Nobunaga had looked at him, stating that the promised hour of their demise had arrived and that it had been fun. The young Mori had wept in the flames, crying out that he still wanted to live out Nobunaga's grand dream right alongside him, asking if his lord was truly certain about this end. Nobunaga had simply replied that it could not be helped. The memory shifted to Mori cradling the warlord's remains in the ash, whispering fiercely that his lord was finally his alone and that he would never hand his body over to anyone else. Mori remembered the crushing weight of that ancient grief, knowing that humans could never truly comprehend the tragic sorrow of watching the person you love turn completely cold just as you reach the ultimate climax of your bond. Rihito snapped him out of the daze, calling his name nervously. Mori blinked away the tears, returning to the present and apologizing, stating simply that none of his past romances had ever come to fruition because that was the painful nature of love. He looked at Rihito, asking if despite the threat of heartbreak, he truly still loved this girl. Rihito smiled softly, admitting that every time he thought about her, his heart raced so fast he couldn't sleep. He then leaned in, whispering that he had a secret from his dad. He had missed his chance to return her handkerchief, so he had been sleeping with it hidden directly under his pillow every night, hoping he might get to see her face in his dreams. Mori's mind completely exploded with dark adoration at the confession. Internally, he screamed about how impossibly precious and untainted Rihito's soul truly was, marveling at the complete lack of calculation or impurity in the boy's emotions. To Mori, he was looking at the most beautiful thing in the entire world, and he couldn't comprehend why modern society made youth feel ashamed of being total virgins. Driven by an intense impulse, Mori demanded to see the handkerchief for a moment. Rihito handed it over, only for Mori to immediately shove his face into the fabric and sniff it deeply to analyze the girl's scent. Rihito shrieked, snatching it back and calling Mori an absolute pervert. Mori stood up straight, his voice dead serious as he swore to Rihito that he would protect him always. Rihito stared at him, utterly confused by the intense declaration. Mori explained that Rihito's very purity was a beacon that naturally attracted people, meaning there was no doubt the girl had already fallen completely in love with him too.
Meeting to burn off the terrifying rush of adrenaline and protective anxiety, Mori announced he was heading out for a midnight walk. He reminded himself that while he had lived for centuries, he had consciously chosen a path of peaceful coexistence with humanity, which meant he strictly limited his hunting to dangerous criminals who harm society. If evil wrongdoers were not needed by humans, he would use them as his sustenance. Deep in a dark alleyway blocks from the bathhouse, Mori cornered a violent thug, asking him coldly if he had ever killed a human before. The thug panicked, drawing a weapon and yelling at Mori, asking if he was a cop or just a weirdo trying to scare him. Mori didn't answer, his fangs extended as he sank them into the criminal's neck. However, the moment the blood hit his tongue, Mori recoiled with an expression of intense disgust, spitting it out onto the pavement. He groaned in frustration, muttering that the blood of a corrupted, evil youth tasted absolutely putrid and foul. He wiped his mouth, desperately craving a decent meal and wishing he could finally drink the top-grade, exquisite blood he had been cultivating for a decade.
After that, Mori quietly made his way through the silent neighborhood streets until he finally stopped outside the girl's house. The moonlight reflected softly against the windows as he stood hidden in the shadows, staring up toward her room. For a brief moment, he wondered if she would be too frightened to even respond. Still, he slowly raised his hand and tapped lightly against the glass window. Inside the room, the girl froze in surprise. She carefully stepped closer, nervous and confused about who could possibly be outside at such a late hour. After hesitating for several seconds, she slowly slid the window open. The moment the vampire saw her face clearly, his crimson eyes widened slightly in shock. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then the stranger awkwardly cleared his throat and immediately introduced himself. "Please do not misunderstand," he said calmly. "I am a vampire, not a criminal or some strange stalker. I only wish to speak with you for a short moment." The girl's face instantly turned pale. In complete panic, she quickly grabbed a small charm hanging near her desk and began nervously reciting a prayer under her breath. The vampire let out a tired sigh. "Those kinds of things usually do not work on someone like me," he admitted. Trying to appear harmless, he carefully attempted to step through the open window into the room. The instant he crossed the edge of the window frame, an invisible force suddenly slammed into him. Gah! A powerful talismanic barrier burst with energy and violently pushed him backward away from the house, staring at the glowing protective charm near the window with complete disbelief and muttering to himself. So this house is protected too. After calming himself, he looked back toward the frightened girl and raised one hand peacefully. "I only came here to ask one question," he said seriously. The girl hesitated nervously. Question?" The vampire narrowed his eyes slightly. "Did you fall in love today?" The girl blinked in complete confusion. "In love?" "Yes," he replied immediately. "Love. Surely you did, correct?" The girl stared at him for several awkward seconds before slowly shaking her head. "No," she answered honestly. "I am not in love at all." The vampire froze completely. The night suddenly became perfectly silent around them. To be continued. If you enjoyed this supernatural comedy, please like, share, and subscribe. Follow for more updates on Mori's desperate quest to protect Rihito's purity.